I'm making a video game with underwater mechanics. In this devlog,
Prepare a playtest for players to try Worlds 3 and 4. Performance fixes. Redesigned enemy. Work through some of the playtest feedback items. When I redesigned the score screen, I left the tutorial for later. The previous screen only showed the gathered chest, so I left that part in. Since that felt super empty, I decided to display the controls in the blank area, reusing my text and sprite components from other parts of the game. I also updated the display to account for the active device using the same mechanism as the control settings screen. I had some leftover tasks from the fourth world, so I addressed those. First, I made the watercolors consistent for the two chest levels. I also have a task to revisit this for other worlds and see if I can pick lighter colors for the water so each level in the world has the same water tone based on chest count. Another minor item I had left was to do something with the streams when you start the level, since getting pushed by invisible forces when the particle system hasn't reached the top is odd. I fixed this just by setting the streams to pre-warm, which achieves the desired effect. I also received the prop assets, so I decorated each level with them. The tools I have built previously made this go by much faster. Since I'll have some players from version 0.3 play the game, I know their progress will reset. I started building some buttons so playtesters could decide at what level they want to help me test the game. These buttons simply set the correct state on the save file, but don't mark the dialog complete so a player can still experience that part. While working on this, Christina released an awesome video and animations with UI elements. I followed her tutorial and applied a little bit of extra flair to the playtest menu. Playtesters mentioned the dialog could not be controlled with either the keyboard or gamepad. This was caused by a lack of autofocus on the primary button when the text displays. Changing this setting made things work the way I wanted them to. While tweaking that, I also messed with the setting that would skip the typing effect and display the dialog when you first press continue. Once again, the forum solution worked out of the box without much tweaking. While messing with this, I noticed that the anchors behind the dialog were still navigable. I removed auto navigation from the button so it wouldn't focus on the anchors. I opted to do it this way for now, but I could orchestrate canvas groups and interactable states if needed. Following those dialog changes, I also created the dialog for the Underwater Ruins world. Then I had to remember how things worked and what part of the dialog bridge script controlled which conversations. I probably should have written that down somewhere. Last devlog, I mentioned performance issues with the temple spears. On Discord, Hooch gave me a suggestion to tinker with using the on-visible events to enable or disable colliders, so I gave that a shot. I gathered a profiling sample prior to enabling my change to see what the impact would be. Prior to the change, I averaged about 120 FPS. Then I profiled a sample with the dynamic collider change based on the visibility events. This seemed to average about 150 to 160 FPS, with frame drops not being as noticeable. Since this seemed to work, I tried the level that was giving me problems without the change just to measure the impact. Then I tried it with the new change. Unfortunately, the difference wasn't as noticeable here. Since I had gathered profile captures for both sets, I used a profiler analyzer and tried to make sense of it. Clearly, I need to read the 75-page PDF to understand what's going on. In order to get a quick snapshot, I compared the problematic areas I had found before, looking at physics destroy calls between snapshots. Comparing just the physics and rendering differences between the methods showed me about a 20% improvement from the old mechanism, which I think is good enough for now. A piece of feedback I've gotten consistently is that the first world seems a bit dull. Most players expected the naval mines to blow up, so I finally took the time to make that happen. I started by setting up a radius around the mine and applying an impulse to objects around it, using a formula based on distance from the center. It may be hard to tell on the clip, but some force is applying to the player. This was odd since the jet stream traps are able to move the player. The one difference I noticed is they apply a constant force, so I set up the mine to apply the same type of force to the player while in the radius. The main culprit for the behavior not working is the clamping logic I used to stop the player instantly when they stop moving horizontally. I played around with removing the behavior or even using degrading velocity, but the player felt slippery and I lost the snappiness, so I explored other options. Instead, I opted for faking out the impulse and apply a larger force for a smaller period of time. This achieves the desired result of pushing the player away for a bit, but doesn't require me to rework the whole movement system. The player now has a function that allows objects to apply a force to it within its fixed update method for a period of time. The player script handles the clamping logic and doesn't reset the velocity to 0 if an external force is applied. With that working, I updated the script to also manage a particle system to play an effect while the mine is in its exploding stage. For nostalgia, I quickly grabbed a Wind Waker effect just to get things working. My first try at the effects was making everything from a basic particle by studying other effects. Since the effects assets I bought already had an explosion, I took its particle parts as a base and slowly composed my own, tweaking settings in those particles to fit what I wanted. This quickly let me have a decent looking explosion without smoke or bubble effects. Then I added a smoke cloud and some bubbles and asked for feedback. With the last clip, Hooch pointed out that my player bubbles were not simulated in the world space, so I fixed that. I also made the smoke lighter and with less alpha at the start. Since I was playing with a standalone prefab, I had to retrofit the effect to the other mines. These were created when I didn't know about prefab variants, so I had to copy things about 7 times. The force and detection is based on the center of the mine and not the whole object, so I added an extra center point game object which became the parent of the effect. Now all mines apply the explosion from the same spot. Here's how the effect looks in one of the levels. Overall, I'm really glad I finally listened to reason and made this trap much cooler. An item I had left over from the last playtest was accounting for the leaderboards when downloading scores for friends. By design, the API returns all the entries regardless of parameter limit, and my boards didn't account for that. So I updated the boards to contain a scroll view. I had to tweak the settings a bunch to get the vertical scroll bars to behave just how I want and make use of a content size fitter to expand the content appropriately. The previous version of the leaderboards had a fixed set of 8 entries. Any unused entry would go blank. With a do not dynamic approach, I also had to add filler entries so the boards wouldn't look as plain when there weren't 8 entries.
That's it for this devlog. My focus for the next part will be
design the bonus level, design the interactive credit sequence, work on producing a gameplay trailer for the game. If you want to support me, please visit the Don't Drown store page linked in the description and add the game to your wishlist. Until next time.